The first ships appeared without warning on a crisp autumn morning. Massive vessels that blocked out the sun as they descended through Earth's atmosphere, their hulls shimmering with iridescent patterns no human engineer could comprehend. For 3 days, they hovered silently over major cities, emanating strange lights but making no attempt at communication. Admiral June Park stood on the roof of the United Earth Defense Headquarters in Seoul, watching the largest ship through his binoculars. His weathered face remained calm despite the chaos unfolding across the globe. 27 years in military service had taught him to keep his emotions in check, but even he couldn't deny the flutter of excitement in his chest. "They're opening," his aide whispered, pointing to the underside of the craft where a previously invisible seam had begun to glow blue. Park lowered his binoculars. So they are. The world watched through billions of screens as the first aliens revealed themselves. They called themselves the Galactic Concordat, a coalition of 37 spacefaring species that had formed an interstellar government spanning most of the Milky Way. Their representative, a tall being with 4 arms and skin that resembled polished obsidian, addressed the hastily assembled United Earth Council. "We have been observing your development for some time," the alien said, its translator device producing flawless human speech. "Your species shows remarkable potential. However, the Concordat has concerns." Park sat rigid in his seat as the alien delegation presented their case with clinical precision. Humans were too unpredictable, they claimed, too emotional, too violent. Their history was marked by endless conflicts. Their entertainment glorified destruction, and their scientific advancement lacked proper ethical oversight. "The Concordat cannot risk introducing an unstable element into our society," the lead diplomat concluded. "The consensus is clear. Earth and its colonies must remain quarantined until humanity demonstrates sufficient societal maturity." The room erupted in protests. Park remained silent, studying the aliens' body language. They weren't negotiating. They were delivering a verdict. 3 days later, the Concordat's massive construction ships began deploying automated sentinel stations at strategic points throughout the solar system. Sleek, chrome structures that hummed with unknown technology, designed to monitor and contain Earth's population within the bounds of their home system. "They're setting up a cage," Park muttered as he watched the feeds from orbit. Beside him, Dr. Yun Cho, Earth's leading xenobiologist, nodded grimly. "Not just a cage," she replied, zooming in on one of the stations. "Look at those weapon mounts. They're prepared to enforce this quarantine by any means necessary." The Concordat ambassadors remained diplomatic but firm. Humanity would be permitted to continue development within their solar system. They could mine the asteroid belt, establish colonies on Mars and the moons of the gas giants. But any attempt to develop faster-than-light travel or venture beyond the Sentinel network would be met with immediate intervention. "For how long?" demanded Council President Tae Min during the final meeting. "Until you are ready," came the reply. "Perhaps 1,000 of your years, perhaps more." Park watched from the observation deck as the alien armada rose into the sky, their engines leaving trails of blue-green light that lingered in the atmosphere for hours afterward. The Sentinels remained, cold and watchful, their sensors trained on humanity's every move. That night, riots broke out in cities across the globe. Religious extremists claimed it was divine judgment. Conspiracy theorists insisted it was an elaborate hoax. Military hardliners demanded immediate action against the Sentinels despite the suicidal nature of such a response. Park ignored them all. Instead, he called a private meeting with Earth's top scientists, military strategists, and political leaders in an underground facility beneath the Pacific Ocean. "They think they know us," he said, pacing before the assembled group. "They've studied our history, our conflicts, our weaknesses, but they've missed something fundamental about human nature." He activated a holographic display showing the Sentinel network. "Yes, we fight amongst ourselves. Yes, we can be violent and unpredictable, but nothing unites humans like a common adversary." Dr. Cho raised her hand. "Admiral, you're not suggesting we attack these Sentinels? Their technology is centuries beyond ours." "No," Park replied with a thin smile. "I'm suggesting something much more dangerous. I'm suggesting we prove them wrong." Over the following weeks, the United Earth Council transformed. What had been a largely ceremonial body suddenly gained real power as nations voluntarily surrendered authority. The quarantine had achieved what centuries of diplomacy could not: true global cooperation. Resources previously devoted to military competition were redirected towards space exploration and development. Secret research facilities were established beneath the lunar surface, hidden from the Sentinels' watchful eyes. Engineers studied the alien technology from a distance, looking for weaknesses in their surveillance network. 6 months after the Concordate's departure, Park stood before the newly empowered council. The room was silent as he outlined his audacious plan. "They expect us to rage against our cage," he said. "They expect us to attack the Sentinels or surrender to despair. Instead, we will build, we will learn, we will prepare. And when they least expect it, we will slip between the bars of our cage and emerge into the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as equals they failed to recognize." President Tay rose from his seat. "And if they catch us?" Park's expression hardened. "Then we will have proven their assumptions correct. But I don't believe that will happen. They underestimate human ingenuity, our capacity for patience, our ability to adapt." He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "They cast us out because they fear what we might become. I say we show them exactly what humanity is, capable of when united by a common purpose." The council chamber erupted in applause. As Park walked out, he glanced at a small screen showing one of the Sentinel stations orbiting silently above Earth. Its sensors swept across the planet, monitoring for threats, unaware that beneath its watchful eye, humanity was already planning their greatest journey. "We're coming to the stars," he whispered, "whether they welcome us or not." Dr. Hannah Kim's fingers trembled as she reviewed the data for the 100th time. The holographic display bathed her underground lab in soft blue, light, numbers and equations floating in the air around her. 20 years of work had led to this moment. 20 years since the Concordate had locked humanity in their cosmic prison. "It works," she whispered to herself. "It actually works." The door to her lab slid open with a soft hiss. Admiral June Park, now in his 70s but still standing straight as a rod, walked in flanked by his daughter, Captain Sue Park. "Tell me good news, Doctor," the old admiral said, his voice rougher than it had been 2 decades ago. Hannah nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "Hey, we've done it. The quantum slip drive creates a momentary phase shift that renders the ship essentially invisible to conventional detection methods. We can slip right past the Sentinels without triggering their alarms." Sue stepped forward, studying the simulations with a critical eye. At 35, she was already one of Earth's most decorated space pilots, having led daring missions to the outer reaches of the solar system, always carefully avoiding the watchful Sentinels. "How long will the phase shift last?" Sue asked. 17 minutes at maximum. After that, the quantum fields destabilize." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. 17 minutes to get beyond the Sentinel perimeter. It's tight, but doable." "There's more," Hannah said, swiping her hand through the hologram to reveal new data. "Once we're clear, the drive can transition to full FTL. We've calculated that Proxima Centauri is reachable in approximately 6 weeks." The room fell silent. 6 weeks to reach another star. The Concordate had made interstellar travel seem like an impossibility for humans, something they might achieve in 1,000 years if they behaved themselves. Yet here they were, on the verge of breaking their chains. "When can we be ready?" the Admiral asked. Hannah met his gaze steadily. "The Pathfinder can be retrofitted with the prototype drive in 3 months. 3 months later, deep within the asteroid belt, the colony ship Pathfinder underwent its final preparations. Hidden within a hollowed-out asteroid mine that shielded it from the Sentinel's scans, the massive vessel hummed with potential energy. Inside the ship's command center, Sue reviewed the mission parameters with her crew. 10,000 colonists waited in cryo-sleep below decks. Scientists, engineers, farmers, teachers, doctors. Volunteers all, each chosen for their skills and their courage. The solar monitoring station on Mercury just sent word. Her first officer reported. "A massive flare is building on the sun's surface. We have approximately 7 hours before it peaks. Sue nodded. The timing was crucial. The electromagnetic interference from the flare would provide additional cover for their escape. Alert all stations. Begin power-up sequence. As the hours ticked by, Sue made her way to the observation deck where her father waited. The old admiral stood with his hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the view screen that showed the distant Earth, a blue jewel against the blackness. "I should be going with you," he said without turning. Sue joined him at the window. "Your place is here coordinating the next phase. If we succeed, others will follow." He finally looked at her, his eyes moist. "Your mother would have been proud." A small smile touched Sue's lips. Her mother had died during the riots that followed the quarantine, one of thousands lost in those dark days, before humanity had found its new purpose. "I know," she said simply. The alert came sooner than expected. The solar flare had intensified faster than predicted, already beginning to wash over the inner system with waves of charged particles. It was time. Sue took her position in the captain's chair as the great engines of the Pathfinder rumbled to life. The asteroid shell that had concealed them split open like a massive stone egg, revealing the gleaming ship within. "Quantum slip. Drive initializing," reported the ship's engineer. "Phase shift in 3, 2, 1. A strange sensation washed over the ship, as though reality itself had become slightly blurred. On the monitors, they could see the nearest Sentinel station, its sensors sweeping harmlessly through the space they occupied without registering their presence. "We're phase shifted," Hannah announced from her station. 17 minutes on the clock." Sue leaned forward. "Full thrust, take us out of the system." The Pathfinder surged forward, accelerating at a rate that would have crushed everyone aboard, if not for the inertial dampeners reverse-engineered from concordate technology. They raced past the orbit of Jupiter, then Saturn, the Sentinels growing. More sparse but no less dangerous. 12 minutes remaining, Hannah called out, her voice tight with tension. A warning light flashed on the tactical console. "Captain, Sentinel at bearing 047, adjusting position. It might be random, but if it continues on that vector." Sue's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "Adjust course 3 degrees starboard. Maintain acceleration." The minutes stretched like hours as they approached the edge of the Sentinel network. The outer boundary was marked by particularly powerful monitoring stations placed at strategic intervals. 5 minutes remaining on phase shift, Hannah warned. They could see it now, the final Sentinel, a massive structure bristling with sensors and what they presumed were weapons. They would pass within 10,000 kilometers of it, dangerously close. 4 minutes, 3. The Sentinel suddenly pivoted, its main sensor array pointing directly at them. "It's detected something," the tactical officer whispered. Sue remained calm. "Steady as she goes. Prepare quantum slip transition to FTL on my mark." As they passed the Sentinel, alarms began to sound throughout the ship. "Phase shift destabilizing early," Hannah shouted. "We have 60 seconds before we're visible." The Sentinel was now clearly tracking something, its weapons systems powering up. Whether it had detected them or was simply responding to an anomaly was irrelevant. They were out of time. "Mark!" Sue commanded. The quantum slip drive shifted modes, and the stars around them blurred. The Sentinel fired, a beam of concentrated energy lancing through the space they had occupied a fraction of a second earlier. Then, they were gone, racing toward Proxima Centauri faster than light itself, the first humans to break the bonds of their solar prison. On the observation deck, Sue watched as the stars streaked by, transformed into ribbons of light by their incredible speed. "We did it," she whispered. "We're free." Behind them, the silent Sentinels continued their endless patrol, unaware that humanity had just taken its first step into a much larger galaxy. The horizon cut silently through the darkness of uncharted space, its sleek hull reflecting no light. Commander Day Lee stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back as he studied the holographic display of the star system they were approaching. This far from the core worlds of the Concordate, the stars were sparse, the planets often barren, and cold, perfect hiding places for a civilization that wasn't supposed to exist. "Dropping out of FTL in 3 minutes, Commander," reported his navigator, fingers dancing across the control panel. Day nodded, feeling the familiar twist in his stomach that came with every new exploration. A century had passed since the Pathfinder had slipped humanity's bonds. In that time, what had begun as a single desperate colony on Proxima Centauri b, Nova Terra, had expanded into a network of settlements spanning dozens of star systems, all hidden in the shadows, all connected by quantum communication relays that operated beyond the detection capabilities of Concordate technology. The ship shuddered slightly as it transitioned back to normal space. Before them hung a rust-colored gas giant, massive storm systems swirling across its surface. More interesting were the 7 moons orbiting it, 3 of which showed signs of potential habitability. "Launch the survey drones," Day ordered. "Standard. Search pattern. Keep our emissions minimal." As the drones detached from the ship, Day's second-in-command, Jin, approached with a data tablet. "Latest reports from Nova Terra, sir. The new subspace energy taps are performing beyond expectations. Energy production is up 40% across all colonies." Dai took the tablet, scanning the information with satisfaction. The subspace taps had been one of humanity's most significant innovations, drawing power directly from the dimensional layer beneath normal space. It was technology the Concordate species had never pursued, too focused on conventional energy. "Sources? Any word from the terraforming team on Vega 4? He asked. "Success," Jin replied with a smile. "The adaptive mycelia network has stabilized the atmosphere. They estimate full habitability within 5 years, instead of the projected 20. Another human innovation born of necessity. Traditional terraforming as practiced by the Concordate involved brute force approaches, melting ice caps, seeding atmospheres with manufactured compounds. Humanity, lacking the resources for such methods, had instead developed systems that worked with existing ecosystems, accelerating natural processes through carefully engineered fungal networks that transformed environments from within. Necessity, as Day's great-grandmother Sue Park had often said, was the mother of invention, and humanity had been very necessary indeed. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. "Commander," called the sensor operator, "Drone 3 has detected unusual energy. Readings from the innermost moon." Day moved to the sensor station, studying the readouts with narrowed eyes. "Natural or artificial?" "Definitely artificial, sir. But old. Very old." Hours later, Day led the exploration team himself, their shuttle landing on the airless surface of the small moon. In their environment suits, they approached what at first appeared to be a natural formation of rocks, until they drew closer and saw the perfect geometric patterns carved into the stone. "The entrance is here," said Yuna, the team's xenoarchaeologist, running her scanner over the surface. "Some kind of door mechanism, but no obvious way to activate it." Day knelt, brushing his gloved hand over the symbols etched into the frame of the hidden doorway. They resembled nothing in any human or known alien language. "The scanner is picking up traces of an element we've never encountered before," Yuna continued. "It seems to be responding to our presence, as if triggered by..." Her words. The stone before them shimmered and became translucent, revealing a passage leading down into the moon's interior. "Well," Day said, activating the lights on his helmet, "let's not keep our hosts waiting." The passage descended deeply into the moon, opening eventually into a vast chamber that took their breath away. Suspended in the center was what could only be described as a 3-dimensional star map, glowing points of light hovering in the air without any visible projection technology. It's the entire galaxy," whispered Yuna. "But some of these stars are marked differently." She pointed to clusters of blue-tinted stars scattered throughout the map. As they explored further, they discovered room after room of preserved technology, data storage devices, and what appeared to be research facilities. Everything was powered by some unknown energy source that had kept the facility running for what their tests suggested was over 1,000,000 years. "They called themselves the Architects," Yuna explained hours later, as they gathered in what seemed to be a central control room. She had managed to activate some kind of educational program that communicated through universal mathematical principles. "As far as I can tell, they were a species that evolved billions of years before any current galactic civilization. They seeded technologies throughout the galaxy, and then..." Disappeared. Disappeared how? Day asked, fascinated. The translation isn't perfect, but they seem to have transcended, evolved beyond physical form, perhaps. Over the next weeks, the team carefully documented everything, transferring as much data as they could to the Horizon's computers. What they found astonished them: blueprints for technologies far beyond even what the Concordate possessed. Gravity manipulation, matter conversion, and most significantly, a form of FTL travel that didn't just bend space but stepped outside it entirely, allowing for nearly instantaneous travel across vast distances. Why didn't the Concordate find this? Jin asked as they prepared to depart. They've been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years. Day studied the star map one final time, noticing something he'd overlooked before. The regions marked in blue, the places where the architects had left their knowledge, were all in the galactic rim, the areas the Concordate had dismissed as resource-poor and strategically unimportant. Because they weren't looking here, he replied softly. They were too focused on the wealthy core systems, the established trade routes. They never bothered to look in the shadows. As the Horizon broke orbit, carrying its precious cargo of ancient knowledge, Day stood at the observation window, watching the small moon recede into the distance. He thought of his great-grandmother Sue, who had taken that first brave step into the unknown, of June Park before her, who had refused to accept humanity's imprisonment, of all the humans who had worked in secret over the past century, building a civilization in the dark corners of the galaxy where no one thought to look. We were cast out, he murmured to himself. But maybe that was our greatest blessing. Behind him, the data cores hummed with secrets that would transform humanity's future, gifts from an ancient race to the newest children of the stars. The Concordate science vessel, Eternal Inquiry, drifted through space, its hull scorched by the plasma storm it had barely survived. Captain Zorthal, a tall six-limbed being with crystalline skin, assessed the damage reports with growing concern. Their long-range communications were offline, their navigation systems compromised, and their fuel reserves critically low. Scan for any habitable systems within range, Zorthal ordered, mandibles clicking with frustration. The ship's sensors swept the surrounding sector, eventually highlighting a star system just within reach of their damaged engines. Life signs detected, the sensor officer reported. Advanced civilization. Atmospheric composition suitable for our needs. Zorthal nodded. Set course. We need repairs before we can report back to the Concordate. As they approached the planet, confusion spread across the bridge. The readings showed cities, transportation networks, energy signatures consistent with an advanced spacefaring civilization, yet this system wasn't in any Concordate registry. The mystery deepened when their sensors detected ships rising from the planet's surface to intercept them. Ships of unfamiliar design but undeniably advanced. Open communications, Zorthal ordered. The viewer flickered to life, and the bridge crew froze in collective shock. The being on the screen was unmistakably human, a species that should be contained within their home system, nearly 3,000 light-years away. This is Governor Minho of New Sydney, the human said calmly. Your vessel appears damaged. We can offer assistance. 12 hours later, emergency communications raced through the Concordate's quantum relay network. Humans, the quarantined species deemed too volatile for galactic society, had somehow escaped their confinement. Not only escaped, they had thrived, building a vast hidden civilization right under the Concordate's nose. The Concordate High Council convened in an emergency session that lasted 3 days. The final vote was unanimous. This security breach could not stand. The human settlements must be brought under control immediately. Admiral Jin Park received the ultimatum from the Concordate while standing in the command center of Horizon Station, humanity's military headquarters, hidden in the heart of the Epsilon Nebula. At 45, she carried herself with the same rigid posture as her ancestors, her eyes reflecting the determination of generations of Parks who had led humanity among the stars. They demand our immediate surrender, she informed the gathered military commanders, her voice steady. All human colonies are to submit to Concordate authority. Our technology is to be confiscated and our population safely relocated back to the Sol system. Commander Tae-jun, her strategic officer, snorted. After we've spent a century building our homes out here? Not likely. They're mobilizing what they call a containment fleet, Jin continued. 300 vessels, including 60 dreadnoughts. A murmur ran through the room. The human fleet numbered barely 100 ships, and only 15 of their largest class could match a Concordate dreadnought in size. We should negotiate, suggested one of the older admirals. We can't match those numbers. Jin's expression remained impassive. My great-great-grandfather didn't break us out of our cage, so we could walk into another one voluntarily. She activated the holographic display at the center of the room. Besides, we don't need to match their numbers. The display showed a region of space near the Epsilon Ridge, a massive formation of stellar dust and newborn stars that created a natural boundary between Concordate space and the regions humanity had claimed. They'll have to come through here, she said, highlighting a narrow corridor of navigable space through the ridge. Their formations are designed for open space combat. They rely on numbers and overwhelming firepower. She manipulated the display, zooming in on specific points throughout the ridge. We've spent decades studying their tactics. We know how they think. They don't improvise well. They follow protocols established thousands of years ago. Over the next weeks, as the Concordate fleet gathered, Jin positioned her forces carefully. Unlike the massive, heavily armored dreadnoughts favored by the Concordate, human vessels were smaller, faster, and incorporated technology derived from the ancient architects, technology the Concordate had never encountered. The first wave of Concordate ships entered the ridge with supreme confidence. Their sensors detected the human forces waiting on the other side of the narrow passage and calculated an easy victory based on their superior numbers. They didn't detect the thousands of small, unmanned drones scattered throughout the dust clouds, each carrying a subspace energy tap, modified to serve a very different purpose. Admiral Jin stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Defiance, watching the enemy approach. All ships maintain position. Wait for my signal. The Concordate fleet pressed forward in perfect formation, their weapon systems charging as they prepared to engage the seemingly outmatched human vessels. Now, Jin said quietly. Throughout the ridge, the subspace taps activated simultaneously. Instead of drawing energy from subspace, they momentarily inverted, creating thousands of localized disruptions in the fabric of reality. To the Concordate ships, it was as if space itself had suddenly become treacherous, unstable, like sailing from calm seas into a hurricane without warning. Their shields flickered as power fluctuations rippled through their systems. Communications distorted. Navigation systems failed as the carefully calculated parameters of normal space no longer applied, and into this chaos, Jin launched her attack. Human ships, designed to operate in these distorted conditions, swarmed from multiple vectors. They moved like predators through the confused Concordate formation, targeting propulsion systems and weapons with surgical precision. "They're breaking formation," reported Tae-jun, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "Their command structure is fragmenting. The Concordate had never faced an enemy who could manipulate the fundamental properties of space itself. Their protocols had no contingency for this type of warfare." Individual ship captains, cut off from central command, fell back on standard responses, which made them predictable. Jin watched as the carefully orchestrated chaos unfolded exactly as she had planned. Launch the phase missiles. Sleek projectiles shot from the human vessels, passing harmlessly through the Concordate shields as if they weren't there, another gift from the architect's technology. They rematerialized inside the enemy ships, targeting critical systems. Within hours, what had begun as a certain Concordate victory had transformed into a rout. 30 dreadnoughts destroyed or disabled, dozens of smaller vessels captured intact, the remainder of the fleet retreating in disarray, their formation shattered. As Jin watched the enemy flee, she thought of her ancestor June Park, who had once stood watching helplessly as alien ships placed humanity under quarantine. Now, generations later, his descendant had just delivered a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity would never be caged again. "Send a transmission to the Concordat High Council," she ordered. "Tell them we're willing to discuss terms as equals." Behind her on the main viewer, The dust clouds of the Epsilon Ridge swirled, illuminated by the remnants of battle, a new stellar phenomenon that would soon enter galactic legend. Unity Station hung in space at the exact coordinates where a sentinel once guarded the boundary of humanity's prison. The massive structure gleamed like a silver lotus flower, each petal a docking bay where ships from across the galaxy now gathered. Inside its central dome, beneath a transparent ceiling that offered a panoramic view of the stars, representatives from over 300 species assembled for the most significant diplomatic event in recorded galactic history. Admiral Jin Park stood at the entrance to the Grand Hall, adjusting the collar of her formal uniform. At her side, her aide Lieutenant Minjun looked uncharacteristically nervous. "There are 17 Concordate High Counselors in attendance," Minjun whispered, "including Supreme Arbiter Genthal himself." Jin nodded, maintaining her composure despite the significance of the moment. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Epsilon Ridge, where her forces had shattered the Concordate's containment fleet. 3 months of tense negotiations, veiled threats and gradually dawning realization on the part of the Concordate that they were dealing with something unprecedented. "Are our allies ready?" she asked. "Yes, Admiral. The Viridian delegation is seated in the East Wing, along with representatives from the Krell Confederacy and the Solari Remnant." These were species that humanity had discovered during their century of hidden expansion, civilizations also deemed unworthy by the Concordate, relegated to the margins of galactic society, or ignored completely. Together with humanity, they had formed the Rimwood Coalition, a shadow alliance that had grown in strength while the Concordate remained blissfully unaware. Jin took a deep breath and stepped into the hall. Conversations hushed as attendees noticed her arrival. The Concordate representatives, distinguished by their ornate robes and crystalline skin, turned to watch her with expressions that ranged from barely concealed hostility to reluctant respect. She made her way to the central platform, where a simple table had been placed. On it rested a single data crystal containing the document that would reshape the galaxy's future. "Representatives of the galactic community," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. 120 years ago, my ancestor stood before the Concordate and was told that humanity was not worthy of joining your society. Today I stand before you not seeking admission to your hierarchy, but proposing its replacement with something better. Murmurs spread through the alien delegations. Jin activated the holographic display above the table, showing the full extent of human territories, over 800 settled worlds, spanning what the Concordate had considered the worthless outer rim of the galaxy. "While you quarantined us, we built," she continued. "While you dismissed us, we explored. While you underestimated us, we discovered technologies and historical truths that your civilization, for all its age and wisdom, had overlooked." Another hologram appeared, showing the ruins discovered by Commander Day Lee, the legacy of the architects, the precursor species whose technologies had accelerated human development beyond what the Concordate could have imagined possible. "We found the gifts left by those who came before all of us," Jin said, "not in the wealthy core systems that the Concordate coveted, but in the forgotten corners of the galaxy where no one thought to look." Supreme Arbiter Genthal rose from his seat, his crystalline form catching the light from the stars above. "These claims are outrageous. The Concordate has stood for 50,000 years. We have maintained peace and order throughout the galaxy. For some," Jin countered, "for those you deemed worthy. But how many species have you relegated to obscurity because they didn't match your criteria for inclusion? How many potential allies have you turned into subjects?" She gestured to the Viridian delegation, beings composed of living metal who had evolved in the radiation-heavy systems of the galactic rim. The Viridians developed technologies that could have revolutionized medicine throughout the galaxy. But because their thought patterns didn't conform to your standards of predictability, you classified them as a monitoring case rather than a partner species. Jin moved around the table, addressing the entire assembly. The Concordate was built on the premise that some species are inherently superior to others, more stable, more predictable, more worthy of having a voice in galactic affairs. humanity rejects this premise entirely. She activated another hologram, displaying the structure of the proposed Galactic Assembly, a new form of interstellar governance where all species would have equal standing, where decisions would be made by consensus rather than decree. "We could have used the technologies we discovered to conquer," Jin said. "We could have responded to a century of imprisonment with vengeance. Instead, we offer partnership." For hours, the debate raged. Concordat hardliners argued that the existing system had maintained stability for millennia. Representatives of minor species countered with centuries of grievances, of being treated as afterthoughts in a galaxy dominated by a self-appointed elite. Through it all, Jin remained steadfast, addressing each concern with the certainty of someone who knew their position was just. Finally, as the station's artificial day cycle began to dim toward evening, Supreme Arbiter Genthal approached the central table. "The Concordat has reconsidered its position," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a civilization forced to confront its own prejudices. "We acknowledge that changes to the galactic order are necessary." A hush fell over the assembly as Genthal placed his six-fingered hand on the data crystal, officially recognizing the new charter. One by one, representatives from across the galaxy followed suit. First the humans' allies from the Rimwood Coalition, then former Concordat subject species, and finally the remaining Concordat High Counselors themselves. As the last signature was recorded, Jin stepped forward once more. The entire assembly rose to their feet in recognition of the moment's significance. "We were cast out because you feared what we might become," she said, her gaze sweeping across the gathering. "Now you know what we did become. Not conquerors but builders, not destroyers but discoverers. The stars belong to all of us, together." Above them, through the transparent dome, a new star suddenly flared into brilliance, a supernova perfectly timed with the ceremony's conclusion, as if the galaxy itself was acknowledging the dawn of a new era. Jin looked up at the cosmic display and thought of her ancestors, of June Park, who had defied the quarantine, of Sue, who had led the first exodus, of Dai, who had discovered the secrets of the architects, generations of humans who had worked in shadow and secrecy, building toward this moment when humanity would finally take its rightful place among the stars, not as subjects, not as students, but as equals, offering a hand in friendship to a galaxy that had once rejected them. As delegations began to mingle, barriers of species and history momentarily set aside, Jin allowed herself a small smile. The journey had been long, but at last humanity had built an empire that no one saw coming. An empire not of conquest but of cooperation, not of subjugation but of shared discovery. An empire worthy of the stars themselves. The end.